Hi, this is Ethlie and Vare, and we are live at the Center for Healthy Sex, talking about sex, romance, and fantasy. I want to thank the Center and Alexandra Katahakis for having me come out today and do this webinar, and I want to thank my engineer, Tom, sitting at my right, who is going to try to keep this thing all working smoothly, because I'm not exactly a technophobe or a Luddite, but I am really clumsy, and I will always hit the wrong button. So the idea of our talk today is whether or not sex, love, and fantasy can be addictive, whether you're addicted to them, and what to do about it if you are. Now, this is an interactive conversation. I want to make it an interactive experience, but not a chaotic one. So what I'm going to try to do is pause a few times during the presentation and the slideshow and then open it up for questions. So I'm trusting Tom, the engineer, to make it possible that you can be heard or seen, or that I can read what you have to say when you chime in, okay? So that's what we're going to try. Now, main thing is I am not anti-sex, anti-love, or even anti-fantasy. I am not here to say anything bad about sex and love. I love sex and love. I'm just saying that they can be addictive. I mean, think about it. If it weren't for love and sex, our species would not have survived to this point in history. Our need, and it's not just a desire, it's a need to bond and to procreate, is wired into the deepest part of our lizard brains, the limbic system, as they call it, the amygdala, if you want to be technical and brain science-y. The need for sex and love is right up there with the need for air, the need for food, the need for water. I can point you to brain scans, to fMRIs, to PET scans that will show you that looking at a picture of your latest crush lights up your brain's reward centers exactly the same way snorting a line of cocaine does it, right? So just like not everyone is going to get addicted to cocaine, not everyone's going to get addicted to their latest crush, but why shouldn't it be equally as addictive? The funny thing to me is that we have so much trouble convincing the world that sex and love can be as addictive as drugs and alcohol. I think it should be harder to convince people that drugs and alcohol can be as addictive as sex and love. Still, there are plenty of people who will insist that love addiction isn't a real addiction. I say try the same test that the old-timers in AA used to do with the alcoholic that didn't think he was an alcoholic. They said, well, don't drink for 30 days and see what happens. I say if you want to find out if a drug is addictive, take that drug away and see how you do. So, okay, take away your love object and see how you feel. Go a week without a phone call from him or from her. And so, go a day without a text message from him or from her and see how you feel. See if you go into withdrawal. See if any of these symptoms are at all familiar to you. I'm going to read from my book. Have you ever felt this way? You're curled up on the couch in a fetal position waiting for him to call. Nothing else in the world matters, nothing. The void inside you is so big you could crawl into it. You have no appetite, but it doesn't matter because you can't taste anything anyway except maybe sugar and salt. You relive past conversations in your head, revising and rewording them over and over. You weep at random intervals. You can't fall asleep. When you finally do fall asleep, you can't stay asleep. Then you can't get out of bed. When you do finally get up, you reread some old emails or listen to some old voicemails. It's calming a little to hear that voice. You write an email you will never send, revising and rewording it over and over. You weep at random intervals. The phone rings and you leap for it like it's a pot boiling over on the stove. The anticipation makes your whole body quiver. If it is him, the euphoria tickles like pink champagne in your nose. Your voice goes up a register. If it isn't him, the disappointment weighs like lead. You go back to the couch. You weep at random intervals. If you do go out, which happens less and less often, your heart lurches in your throat every time you see a car, the same make and model as his car, or a similar make and model, or the same color. You imagine he's about to walk out of every doorway, about to turn every corner. You look at every girl on the street and imagine that he's going out with her. You weep at random intervals. Does that sound like withdrawal to you? That's my experience. And by the way, feel free to substitute him for her and her for him. This is not a gender-specific disease. It can hit anyone. Now, like any addiction, it feels good until it starts to feel bad. There's a cartoon that's going to come up, at least it should, if it's duplicating my screen. The engineer is pointing to me that it is not duplicating my screen. Okay. We're just assuming that there's a delay and that you will get to see my cartoon. So, like any good addiction, sex and love addiction feel good right up until they start to feel bad. There's a working definition of addiction these days. It is a chronic and relapsing brain disease characterized by obsessive use of a mind-altering substance or behavior despite negative life consequences. It's those negative life consequences that eventually wake us up to the realization that something's been wrong all along. Consequences like that awful feeling of clutching someone's ankle as they desperately try to leave the room, or the credit card bill for those massage parlors and late-night chat rooms, or herpes, or HIV. Don't ever let anyone tell you that love addiction isn't dangerous. People die from sex and love addiction. They die from homicide. They die from suicide. They die from the after effects of the drugs and the alcohol that we addicts use to ease the pain. Calling sex, love, romance, fantasy, the addiction toxic is an understatement. I say make no bones about it. Love addiction can be fatal. It's every bit as fatal, as dangerous as the addiction to cigarettes, the addiction to alcohol, the addiction to heroin. Okay, I'm going to pause and let people write stuff because we can't get the slideshow working. I'm going to say to my engineer that I did email a PowerPoint version of it to the Center for Healthy Sex, so you may be able to download it through that. And in the meantime, I am going to, yes, there are PowerPoint screens to answer your question, Karen B. I just can't seem to get them up. Michael says 3 years ago, my book got him into, someone says that he's got recovery for 3 years since reading my book. I am so happy to hear that. My book, Love, Addict, Sex, Romance, and Other Dangerous Drugs, is what got, researching it is what really got me in, my own addiction is what got me interested in the subject. Researching it is what taught me a little bit about the subject. Someone says that they're dual diagnosed and they have some schizoid symptoms. Also, a lot of people with OCD and a lot of people who are on the Asperger's spectrum find that they have similar problem with the obsessiveness of the sex and love addiction. Remember, I talked about the obsessive use of a mind-altering substance or behavior. Well, these repetitive and obsessive thoughts are quite similar in many ways to the repetitive and obsessive behaviors of people with obsessive-compulsive disorder. And as I'm about to talk about and show you, if we can get the screens up, our neurochemistry, the brain disease is essentially an affect of our serotonin regulation, our dopamine regulation, and in the case of bonding to a toxic relationship, oxytocin and vasopressin. So it is no, we can't get PowerPoint up. We're having so much fun. Look, they can see my slide on their thing. It only takes a few minutes. Okay. This is what I was saying about an addiction feels good until it begins to feel bad. And this if it's going to switch for us, is, look at that. Our definition, a chronic and relapsing brain disease characterized by obsessive use of a mind-altering substance or behavior despite negative life consequences. Now let's see if we can change slides again. Oh, look at that. Now, a lot of times, the general public or even a lot of people in the therapeutic community think of sex and love addiction as a two-headed beast. You are the addict clutching someone's ankle. The clutcher is generally pictured as a female. The clutchee is generally pictured as a male. She is clutching his ankle as he tries to leave the room, usually to have sex with a stranger or to watch porn, and he is the love avoidant, and that's always a male. I say that I think that that's too simplistic, but I'm not going to get that much more complicated. I'm going to try to divide sex and love addiction into three parts because I think that they're each determined by a slightly different balance in brain chemistry. I think you've got basically the infatuation addict, the relationship junkie, and the sex fiend. We can call it sex, love, and fantasy, or if you want, we can call it love, lust, and limerence, which I like because it's alliterative, and limerence is a really cool word. It's a fancy expression for that wonderful, intoxicating feeling you get when you're just falling for someone. So generally we find that the lust aspect is characterized by dopamine, which is the woohoo brain hormone. That's the, this is going to be so hot hormone. It is all about the chase. It is about the conquest. It is about the ritual. Then we have the relationship addiction, the love. This is the person who's the butt of the joke of, what do you tell a woman with two black eyes? Nothing you've already tried to tell her twice. I have been that woman, by the way. This is someone who is so flooded with or so needy for their own oxytocin, the cuddling chemical, vasopressin, which is the loyalty hormone, and serotonin, which is that I'm okay now hormone, the one that addicts never have enough of. Those essentially are the main drivers in the attachment or relationship addiction. And then limerence, my favorite, infatuation addiction, is all about PEA or beta-phenylethylamine. I think I got that right. Serotonin, dopamine. You'll notice a constant repetition of dopamine and serotonin as we talk about the chemistry of love addiction. Dopamine is essentially the anticipatory neurotransmitter. It's the, this is going to be cool. And serotonin is the, that was just what I needed. Well, the addict is always thinking more about this is going to be so cool and never quite feeling like, that's just what I needed. That is the horrible chemistry, the wiring, the miswiring of our brain's reward systems that leads to this addiction. I think like Jessica Rabbit used to say, I'm not bad, I'm just drawn that way. I didn't want to be an addict, I just arrived that way. Way back in the day, the old farts that started AA called alcohol addiction an allergy of the body, an obsession of the mind, and a malady of the spirit. And I think the same thing. I think that this is, as we would say in modern terminology, we would call it biological, behavioral, and emotional. I have a brain disease characterized by an obsession. The pursuit of that obsession causes me to do things that blacken my soul. Okay? Addiction weaves its way through all axes of my life. My behavior in all areas of my life is affected, and so it has to be treated on all tracks. They talk about multimodal therapy. They talk about different intervention models, the pharmaceutical, the cognitive, the therapeutic. It's not easy. It needs a lot of work. I'm going to start moving into some anecdotal type stuff. I have only one story. It's my own. This is me at maybe 18 or 19 years old working at a topless bar with fake ID. By the way, if you've ever worked at a job that requires you to be naked, you may possibly have love addiction. That's where you find us. And I'm going to share you a little bit of the stories of some of the people who participated in my book. But I thought that this would be a good time to break and take any questions that people might have before I just overwhelm myself with information. Do we have questions, Engineer Tom? Okay. Yes, someone who believes that they are dual diagnosed might have a lack of dopamine. We tend to have a lack of dopamine. The tricky nature of dopamine is that they have found with people who use dopamine to treat Parkinson's disease that they sometimes run out and become gambling addicts. So it's like too much is too much. Not enough is not enough, and too much is too much. And there aren't currently many pharmaceutical interventions which help balance dopamine. There are a lot of behavioral interventions, though, and I will talk about those. Getting attached super fast to someone you don't know definitely qualifies. That is, someone says, limerence, absolutely. So let's, any other thoughts we have here? What is the schizoid? Someone is asking me to weigh in a little bit more on dual diagnosis, and I should be very clear that I'm not a psychiatrist, I'm not a psychologist, I'm not even a licensed therapist. What I am is a great example of sex and love addiction. I am what they call in the trade empirical evidence. I can give you my own experience. I can give you some of the signs and symptoms you might see judging your experience. I think these are some key indicators of the possibility of you having sex and love addiction. If you check your crush's daily horoscope in the morning along with your own. Extra points for checking theirs first. Ditto for their Facebook page. If you have ever changed your route home to pass your love object's house, extra points for parking outside and waiting. Standing across the street counts if you live in a big city. Extra points for standing in the rain. You might be a sex and love addict if you find yourself leaving a second or a third or a fourth voicemail message before the first message is returned just in case A, she didn't hear it properly, or B, he's shy and needs encouragement, or C, maybe you dialed wrong, or D, maybe you forgot to leave a callback number, or E, maybe she called and you missed it, or pick a letter. I've got the whole alphabet. You might be a love addict if you can develop an instant fondness for a hobby or musical genre you found abhorrent only days before. You might be a love addict if you know your lover's email password or voicemail password. You probably are a love addict if you have hacked into and read your lover's email or listened to their voicemail. You are probably a love addict if you have read your lover's journal. Extra points if you flip through it first looking for your own name. And yes, I have done that. You might be a sex addict if your life list of sex partners is in the 3 figures. For rock stars and professional athletes, I will allow that to go to 4 figures. Oh, and by the way, you're probably a sex addict if you keep a list of your lifetime sex partners. And yes, I think that you are probably a love addict if you really believe in your heart that you can save that stripper, convict, biker, serial philanderer, suicide survivor, alcoholic with the depth and purity of your love. We love addiction. We know that it's all fantasy. I think this cartoon sums up a lot in my mind. It's like, yes, you can say she's a love addict and he's a sex addict, but what are they both? They're both living in the future. Deep down, they're both fantasy addicts. If you substitute fantasy for projection, for magical thinking, for living in the future, Let me give you some examples of the people who were kind enough to participate in our book and share their love addiction stories with us. I'm waiting for a picture to come up on your screen of a supermodel who almost killed another woman in a jealous rage, a woman she didn't know, in a jealous rage over a man who barely knew she was alive, a man she stalked for 12 years. She turned to opiates for relief of that deep psychic pain, ended up on celebrity rehab. You might remember seeing her puking into a wastebasket on camera. It was not one of her better looks. I also have a story in the book about a promising young actor who short-circuited his career because of his addiction to cocaine and hookers, usually at the same time. Billy said he was never sure if he was getting a good deal on the cocaine because he was such a good customer of the girls or if it was the other way around. I also have the story of a promising fashion designer who absolutely could not find it in herself to walk away from a man who was cheating on her, lying to her, abusing her, belittling her. Her story starts with a suicide attempt and ends with an attempt at recovery. Now, you could say that any of these people are certainly attractive enough to get a date, but that's the thing about love addiction. It isn't about reality. That's what I say, that underneath all of this is the level of fantasy, because the love addict does not see themselves when they look in the mirror. Amber Smith did not see that beautiful woman when she looked in the mirror. Love addicts carry so much shame and such low self-esteem that we look in the mirror and all we see is that gawky teenager or that abandoned child or that unloved infant. We become great sucking black holes of need, desperate for any scrap of affection. And when we do finally get even the littlest scrap, it's like, finally, that serotonin response. Finally, I'm going to be okay. And then what do we need? More. We need more. So here are my three husbands. The one at the top right, who looks like he just might be winding up to hit me, was probably winding up to hit me. He was the one who blackened my eyes, and I just thought, oh, he's so passionate. It's just because he's jealous. He loves me so much. The fresh-faced fellow on the left moved in with me after our first date. 6 years and a child later, we finally knew each other well enough to know that we didn't have very much in common, and we didn't like each other a whole heck of a lot. He was the mistaking infatuation for love qualifier. Now, the one on the bottom was a perfectly nice man, but I think we each had a little bit of projection about what this perfectly nice person would be as a spouse. We are still friends. We are no longer married, but boy, it took me a lot of work to get from drug-dealing wife beater to perfectly nice but not totally appropriate. So as far as my sex life, well, it was generally characterized by insanity. Here are some of my targets. One of them is gay. One of them is a drug dealer. One of them is a babysitter. And one of them is my cousin. This page is this is an Ethlie trifecta here. This is the married guy, the gay guy, and the dead guy. Married, gay, and dead. Oh, those were always my favorites. Next best to that, living in another country. The more unavailable, the better. I'm that person who can walk into a room and 30 people like me immediately and one person doesn't, and I'm going to run to that one person and try desperately to get some affection from them because that's the only one that's going to do it. So, how do you approach this multimodal therapy for this brain disease, this mental obsession, this spiritual emptiness? What I discovered for myself was that when I stopped acting out on the pattern of behaviors, it stopped feeding the obsession. The obsession began to fade. When the obsession began to lift, my brain was able to physically rebuild its circuits and rebalance its chemistry. Psychologically, when I stopped doing the things that made me embarrassed and ashamed, it helped build my self-esteem. It helped alleviate the spiritual malady. This complicated, multimodal treatment for an allergy of the body, an obsession of the mind, and a malady of the spirit all started with the simplest precept. Don't do that. It's like the old joke about the man who goes to the doctor and says, "Doctor, doctor, it hurts when I do this." And the doctor says, "So don't do that." In AA, abstinence is pretty simple. You don't drink. My drunk is some tall, lanky cowboy with cheekbones and biceps who stares into my eyes. So I needed to invent a sobriety that worked for me. Here are my original bottom lines. First, it was no married men. Then it was, okay, no men with girlfriends either. Then it was, okay, no man less than half my age, because totally inappropriate men way too young for me was definitely one of my issues. Okay, no men more than 20 years younger than me. No man on a first date, because, boy, we sex and love addicts do not want to wait to have sex, because, like, what if he leaves? Then we'll never get sex. So no sex on the first date. Okay, no sex on the second date. I give up. Here are some suggestions for you that might be helpful as bottom lines. They have been found to work for a lot of people. We say, if you're an exaholic, if you're trying to get over a qualifier, erase his voicemails, delete his texts, archive his emails. Do not drive by his house, drop into his office, or join his gym. Do box and store his gifts, the keepsakes, the photos, the love letters. Do not cyberstalk him on Facebook. Do call a friend before calling him. Do not call him pretending to be someone else. Some general all-around bottom lines for anybody: no sex for money, either giving or receiving. No flirting at work. A 30-day masturbation vacation. And if you think, oh, masturbation's not my problem, I can stop anytime I want to, I just don't want to. See how you do after day 12. No internet dating. And do you have a Tinder app? How about a Grindr app? How about a Blender app? How about a? Yeah, delete them now. No unprotected sex. That's a self-esteem issue. I can't tell you how many young women I have had to hold their hand as they've gotten abortions because they just couldn't insist on their own protection. No sex outside a committed relationship. That, I think, is an optional. It's useful for a lot of people. Some people, that's not important. These are bottom lines that have helped a lot of people. This was my bottom line when I was married. I will do nothing behind his back that I would not do in front of his face. I think that's a pretty good all-around bottom line. I have one really big bottom line. Do not have conversations with people who aren't in the room at the time. Okay, that was a lot of information. I'm going to take the pause now, have a sip of tea, and see if there are any questions to be answered. Our crack engineering staff is okay. Someone is asking about dating. Every time I attempt to date soberly, my autopilot goes into predator mode, so no dates. How do I transition into healthy relationships? There are some great dating guidelines associated with some of the 12-step programs that help people recover from their sex and love addiction. Some of what I have found is in all abstinence, clarity is bliss. I need as much black and white, as much do this, don't do that, as I can possibly get. So you can have someone that you work with, an accountability buddy or a sponsor if you're a 12-stepper, a therapist that will help you make up guidelines and then keep you to them. Some of the usual dating guidelines are first date should be in a public place. It has to have bookends before and after. You call into your accountability partner before and after the date so that you know and they know that you have ended the date after 2 hours in a public place and have not ended up spending the night falling in love, running away to Las Vegas to get married, all in the course of the first date, because we know how that one goes. So some of the others are simple, no sex until the third date. And how do you make yourself not do it? You work with someone else. I like to say that we're all nuts, but we're not all nuts at the same time. So I work with other people. I check in with other people. I stay accountable to other people so that I'm not chipping away at the edges of my abstinence, because my abstinence is important to me. It has really saved my life. I'm not saying sexually abstinent. I'm not sexually abstinent, but I'm bottom line abstinent. I don't have sex before a third date because by that time I at least know he's coming back, because I cannot stand the feeling of being seduced and abandoned. So if I don't want that horrible feeling of being seduced and abandoned, I should probably try to cut it off at the seduced part. Here we have a correlation between the asexual spectrum and fantasy addiction. The attraction to those who are not showing attraction to you. Yes, I think that there's definitely a big aspect of being attracted to an unavailable or fantasy object. I'm not sure it's the same as asexuality. I think that we're having sex, we're just having it in our heads. I think that it's perfectly possible to be a virgin sex and love addict. So it's some people will liken it to anorexia. I'm not sure I agree with that aspect of it, because to me, I don't think that the sex anorexic is denying themselves pleasure. I think they're denying themselves sex, but they're getting something from it. I think we're always getting some kind of payoff. So that unavailable person, what are we avoiding? Well, we're avoiding intimacy. We're avoiding really being known. We're avoiding being vulnerable and committed to another human being. So I think that attraction to those who are not attracted to us is, yes, it's a product of low self-esteem. Yes, there's a lot of elements to it. But in the end, as someone said to me a really long time ago when I kept complaining about all the bad men out there and why I wanted to be in a relationship and I wasn't in a relationship, someone looked me straight in the eye and said, Ethlie, if you really wanted to be in a relationship, you would be in a relationship. We have a question about, do all sex addicts masturbate daily? No, of course not. Masturbation is, for some people, such a huge problem that they will masturbate many times a day to the point where they're physically injuring themselves. Some will masturbate only occasionally. Some sex addicts have massive amounts of sex. Some sex addicts have very little sex. Some love addicts are serial monogamists. Some are bigamists and polygamists, and there's not a number. I always say that what makes you a sex addict isn't how much you're having sex, it's how much your sex is controlling who you are and how you feel, how much of your time and attention and energy is devoted to thinking about sex, attempting to get sex, reminiscing about the sex you just had or didn't have. So it isn't how much you're doing, it's what it's doing to you. Someone says that they're the only woman in an SAA group. Am I available as a sponsor? What advice can I give to someone who's going through major withdrawal? First, I give you my absolute sympathy. It sucks. Withdrawal is the worst. That's why I maintain my sobriety. I so do not want to have to go through withdrawal again. It's the worst. The best thing I can tell you is it will pass. Just like they say, if you're quitting cigarettes, the craving to smoke will pass whether you pick up the cigarette or not. Those waves of pain and darkness will pass whether you call him or not, whether you show up. So I always say, show up in a bustier with a basket of muffins. Someone's always going to have sex with you if you show up in a bustier with a basket of muffins. But the withdrawal passes. It's got a beginning, an end, and a middle. And I find that the cleaner I make my abstinence, the faster it passes. It's like it's so tempting to chip. It's so tempting to take a cigarette butt out of the ashtray and just have a puff. It's so tempting to just have just a little bump, just a little one-on-one. But that each time that happens, it's just like, it's ripping off the scab, and I have to wait all over for it to heal. So it's just the cleaner the abstinence, the faster the withdrawal will pass, and it will pass. I promise you, it will pass. When we feel bad, we feel like we've always felt this way. We'll always feel this way. That's just not true. That's just a lie. Our disease tells us, our disease that sits on our shoulder, or technically sits at the base of our skull, all the time going, feed me, feed me, feed me, feed me, feed me, feed me, feed me. Don't feed it. Don't feed it. You're making it stronger. Someone says that they've been single and recovering from narcotics abuse for a year, moving to independence, and just back into relating without fear of love addicting again. So someone's in early recovery from opiate use and also from sex and love abuse is a particularly vulnerable space, because as soon as you quit doing drugs, quit drinking, quit smoking, quit overeating, quit gambling, that black hole, that huge big need, it opens up, and just want to, for some people it just becomes a penis-shaped hole, or it's like, oh, give me, fill make me okay, constantly looking for fixing from the outside. So recognizing that that's the case helps. It's just like, I'm not in love with you. You're not an appropriate partner. I'm just needy and new and vulnerable, and just recognizing that this is the addiction. I talk to my disease. I don't know about you, but I have mornings when I wake up with that voice on my shoulder that's going, you're old, you're fat, you're ugly, no one loves you, no one has ever loved you, no one ever will love you. This is particularly bad during PMS, by the way, women. Just like, do you remember that stupid thing you did 27 years ago when you just, and I just go like, oh, it's going to be one of those days, is it? Thank you for sharing. You can be quiet now. Just recognize that it is it's disease talking. It's disease talking. That's not your soulmate. That's just the latest vessel that your addiction has filled. And so it makes it a little easier, I think, to separate it from yourself. There are some theologies that refer to it as a pain body. It's independent from ourselves. It's a pain body, and we feed with our despair. The less I despair, the weaker the pain body becomes, and makes it more possible for me to separate from it. Impulsivity is definitely a factor. Curious as to what it means to not have conversations with people who aren't in the room at the time. I don't know about you, but I have a real big tendency to go back over stuff that didn't work out my way and re-script it. Like, oh, God, I wish I hadn't said that. If I had only said this, then this would have happened, and then this would, and he would have said that, and then I would have said this, and then he would have said that, or projecting about the future, that cartoon about the gal that's on the first date, and it's going like, oh, we'll live in Brentwood or maybe Santa Monica, and I'm thinking star lilies for the wedding centerpieces, and have you ever been on your fourth date with someone in your head when they didn't even know you were there? I am constantly having conversations with people who aren't in the room at the same time, and boy, am I telling it to them right, too. They are really straightening up and flying right when I give it to them in my head. The opposite of having conversations with people who aren't in the room at the time is be here now. So we talk about sex and love and fantasy as if they're different things, but in a way, it's all fantasy underneath. It's all projection. It's all anticipation. It's all expectation. The jolt of dopamine that we're looking for, it's in the pull of the handle of the slot machine. It's not in the few coins coming out of the bottom. The high is the expectation of how good that chocolate cake is going to taste. The taste itself is often a letdown, which is why we eat another piece, and then another piece, and then another piece after that. Dopamine is that blissful certainty that he, she, that's it. That's the one. That's my soulmate. That's the one that's going to complete me. And damn you, Cameron Crowe, for that. No one needs to complete you. You are already complete. That person. We're not little puzzle pieces running around looking for the lock to our key and the key to our lock. We are as we are, full and complete. You are fine. The expectation that will complete me, that will make me okay, that's all fantasy. It's a dopamine-induced haze of excitement and longing. It's all, he's going to say this, and then I'm going to say that, and then he's going to say this, and then I'm going to say that. And when you're in that state of withdrawal, it's all, I should have said that, and then he would have said this, and then I would have said that, and then he'd still be here, and it'd be okay. And no, it's never in the now. You have to be here now. I have one last photo for you, which is me being here now. It's going to eventually come up on screen, I think, but it is the last picture, and you will get it at some point. We do have time for more questions while we're waiting for that to load. It says, is it possible for people with love and lust addiction to succeed in their relationships? Absolutely. In fact, I am sitting at the Center for Healthy Sex, which has an entire therapeutic paradigm based on helping individuals and couples in recovery from love and lust addiction to manage their addiction and have healthy and happy relationships. I personally know a bunch of people, including myself, who have married and been happy and successful in their relationships who started out insane. There is, speaking of the Center for Healthy Sex, Alexandra Katahakis and Tom Bliss have written a daily reflection book of meditations, daily reflections, to help people in recovery. It's in the trade paperback now. It's going to come out in this really beautiful hardcover shortly. There is a lot of help. There are all the 12-step programs, which are free. There is therapy. There is psychiatry. Some people do benefit from some medication for their obsessive-compulsive disorder, clinical depression, and other things. I always caution people never to mistake withdrawal for depression. Withdrawal is not depression. You're sad, but you're not necessarily clinically depressed. Withdrawal is more like nicotine fit than it is like clinical depression. So be careful looking for medication for your depression when what you are is longing for someone. Longing and pining are not clinical depression. That doesn't mean you might not have clinical depression. All I'm saying is consult a professional. There are books This is a very good book about recovering from sex and love addiction and living in relationship. Living in relationship is absolutely possible. What it requires more than anything, I think, is a willingness to be vulnerable, willingness to be intimate, and the ability to show up one day at a time. I always say that that's the one thing you can't fake. You can fake a lot of stuff in life. You can't fake showing up. You have to actually be there.
So the narc abuse was she was
a narcissist.
With a narcissist, worried about reenacting that pattern.
Oh, well, narcissists are tricky because narcissists are charismatic. Narcissists are attractive. And love addicts, as a general rule, are suckers for charismatic people. We tend to be about the bubbles. We tend to be about the sparkle. We tend to be about the superficial because we're not, as a rule, looking for deep, intimate, vulnerable connection. We are looking for validation. We are looking to have someone hot on our arm that helps assuage our own low self-esteem because, like, look, if he's with me, how bad can I be, right? So we are suckers for flattery. We are suckers for good packaging, bad package. We are suckers for trophy wives and rock star boyfriends, and just need to know that. How do you not repeat the same pattern? Well, part of it is be aware of the pattern. And if you said, I have this pattern, you've already got some awareness of the pattern, so, you're on the road. It is a question of, I had a 12-step sponsor once whose all-around advice to me was, what were you thinking about doing, Ethlie? Okay, do something different. It's like, whatever my first thought is, I should probably do the opposite of that thought, because my first thought, generally not a healthy thought. If I look across the room and I see someone that just was like, oh, you look like a 6'4" pile of cocaine. Come sit here by me. I have to recoil. I have to recoil like I would from a pile of cocaine, like I would from a big bottle of booze, because to me, that narcissistic, charismatic, flattering guy is deadly. This is my picture. This is my being here now. This handsome man on my arm is my son. Remember I said that one marriage produced a child? This is that child. This is that child who actually knows how to be in relationship. This is me on his wedding day. Yes, I am the mother of the groom. Look at that happy groom. Look at that happy mother. This, to me, is what being here now feels like. Actually being able to appreciate the love and the joy that's in my life instead of constantly grasping for the one that's just a little bit out of my reach. This is what recovery looks like to me. And boy, it beats being curled up on the floor in the fetal position waiting for the phone to ring. Someone had a question about would I recommend my book to a guy? Absolutely. This is totally a non-gender specific disease. I tried to, in the book, make it as gender neutral as possible, but the publisher felt that, well, mostly women read these books. So they put a woman on the cover. And by the way, that's not me. It's just an incredible coincidence that it came out looking a little bit like me. The art department didn't even know what I look like. So while it feels like a lot of this stuff is directed towards women, it's every bit as useful for male or female, gay or straight, young or old. I have seen people suffer, and I have seen people recover in all spectrums and all areas and stages of life. Someone says that they're married and constantly becoming infatuated with others. I had that same problem when I was married. I had my little flirtation rounds. I would leave my happy home and then go walk around town and flirt with the cop on the corner and the manager of the grocery store and the DJ at the radio station, and just like, because I wanted the hits. I wanted the hits of excitement. That is very connected to the brain chemistry, because when we're in those relationships, the bonded relationships, we are more being suffused with the oxytocin, with the vasopressin, with the serotonin. We're in that stable relationship, but our brain, our little dopamine-loving brain, our little reward centers that are so understimulated are going like, no, I want to hit, I want to hit, I want to hit, I want to hit. So those flirtations, those infatuations, those sometimes affairs with people outside the marriage, I believe, are your little dopamine junkie going out looking for excitement. Now, it's perfectly normal for a human being to want excitement. My recommendation for people in marriages that they feel are getting stale and they want some excitement is, instead of having an affair, skydive, scuba dive, just learn to ride a horse, go jump horses. There's plenty of ways to induce dopamine in oneself that don't involve having a love affair. The excitement is excitement. Sex and love addicts are very often excitement junkies, and I say there's nothing wrong with that as long as you're not endangering your life or endangering the life of people around you. So when you feel like you want to bang the bag boy, go jump out of an airplane instead, but bring a parachute. Someone writes that they suffered the worst emotional pain of their life over an ex whom they hadn't seen in 20 years, but had a 10-week affair. Pure fantasy, and someone who lived in another country, and the affair was online. I'm not reading quotes out because I'm really nearsighted, but what I definitely relate to this person who is infatuated with someone who's in another country. Always one of my favorites. The further away, the better. I don't want to actually have to deal with the reality of you. I absolutely relate to 6 months of detoxing over a 6-day relationship. That's being at the dregs of the disease. That's what it's like when it's really getting bad. The one thing I can say to encourage you is you may have hit rock bottom. And if you have hit rock bottom, there's nowhere to go but up. Or dead. You can always do dead. I don't recommend it. It says that in the gay community, more often than the straight community, we tend to have sex partners out of our relationship, with consent or without it. Is this in any ways healthy, or could it be? I'm a big Dan Savage fan. And Dan Savage has coined the word monogamish, especially within gay relationships. And his main thing that he says about it is that has to be with consent. That you can make whatever sexual rules you want within your own relationship. It is your relationship. And where that really fits with sexual sobriety, in my way of thinking, is that that's real intimacy and vulnerability. For you to say, this is what I want, and it doesn't only include you, that is really allowing yourself the possibility of being hurt. That's an extremely intimate and vulnerable conversation to have. So if two people are in a relationship strong enough to maintain that with absolute full honesty and full disclosure, I think that can be incorporated into a healthy relationship. The problem is that usually there isn't intimacy and there isn't disclosure. Usually it's I would rather ask for forgiveness than for permission. That might be the case with putting money in the parking meter, but it's really not a good way to run an intimate relationship. Someone talks about being in the BDSM community, which helps that helps with the dopamine hits. Absolutely. Monogamish here, heterosexual, married, and totally honest with each other. I would say that there's no reason, that there's nothing about that which is inconsistent with sexual sobriety, in my opinion. Abstinence in Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous, and Sex Addicts Anonymous, in Sexual Compulsives Anonymous, abstinence is self-determined. well, self and another, because I don't know about you, but I have a way of giving myself a break. I cut myself a little too much slack sometimes, so it's good to have someone else check in. But our abstinence and our sobriety is self-defined, much the way a food addict will define what is a healthy meal for them and what is a healthy amount of calories to consume over a day. A bodybuilder or marathon runner, if I decided that I would use their diet as my appropriate diet, that would not be an appropriate diet for me. I should talk to someone about that rather than say, hey, this person is abstinent and look at what they eat. No. What's right for one person may not be right for another. So depending on the relationship, the level of honesty, the level of disclosure, there are different ways to structure relationship and also different ways to structure singlehood. You can accuse someone of being anorexic because they're single and not in a relationship. Or you can say, like I do, it's just like, I like being single. I always say I am the happiest person I know because I'm unemployed and unmarried. I have no one to complain about. Neither of those is technically true, but still, it's a good life. I'm being shown a question about someone who has been unsuccessfully pursuing someone for 11 years and thinks that they have finally a chance at relationship. Does it have a chance of ever being a healthy, balanced relationship? You're in a 12-step program, but the idea of you're the one has been at the forefront of the bottom lines. Hadn't been in the forefront of my bottom lines. Well, I always annoy anyone I sponsor by saying we're not going to talk about him. Don't care about him. Don't care about what he did. He is just the latest object of your addiction. The issue that needs to be healed is you and your addiction. So anyone who's getting healthy in an S program with the goal of getting a healthy relationship, I'm here to get the cookie. I was like that when I first walked into 12-step rooms. I just want to get healthy enough to have a good relationship. No. If relationship or healthy sex or more sex or better sex is my goal, I'm starting out at the wrong point. It's already too important in my life strategy. Some of the literature talks about that our entire life strategy was involved in satisfying the disease, satisfying the addiction. I lived in sexy neighborhoods. I drove a sexy car. I wear sexy clothes. I mean, everything was all in service of that payoff, that cookie. Find me attractive, desire me, want to be with me, love me, want me. So if that's still my goal, I'm cruising for a bruising. Can you be in a healthy relationship with someone that you had been obsessed with that didn't know you were alive? I have no idea. I don't know you. I don't know that person. I say work on your own recovery, and you may find at the other end of this process that you look at that guy, as I have done with so many men I was obsessed with, and I go like, that? I was going to kill myself over that? This is our last question.
Do you want me to read it? Father died of alcohol addiction at 28. Her adoptive father left the family at 15. Narcissist mother disowned her and the rest of the family when she was 40. She falls in love all the time with fantasy, people online who write her, love addicts themselves. Is there any hope? Will I never stop? As soon as my husband lets me down, I feel the need to attach to another to escape. I have swam with whale sharks. Do I have to do it weekly?
Oh, I envy you the whale sharks. I've been trying to find a whale shark for years. I love to dive. I think that this is a really good description of the setup for and the manifestation of love addiction. Is there any hope? Of course there's hope. I had a narcissistic mother, an abandoning father. I was kidnapped and raped as a teenager. I had, a killer cocaine addiction for 17 years. I was arrested and thrown into the penitentiary. I was abused by a husband. I had every setup you could possibly want for my sex and love addiction. I acted out horribly. I was in so much pain for so long, and now I'm not. I think that I now have a life that has balance, that has joy, that I'm free. I don't go around everywhere. You ever go around with that little satellite receiver dish on your head? You go into the supermarket, beep, 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 beep. Are you the one? Are you the one? Are you beep, 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 beep? Are you the one? Are you the one? Everyone you meet, you just go like, are they single? Are they interested in me? Is this guy beep, 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 beep? I don't have that anymore. That's the big exhale. In the end, that's what I was looking for the whole time. I wish you all luck. Buy my book. Buy their book. Join a bulletin board. Go to meetings. Talk to a therapist. Work with others. You don't have to feel like this anymore if you don't want to.